Maggie believed she was signing a marriage contract. What she didn't know was that she had just stepped into the final chapter of a man's life. Junho Kang, a 34-year-old Korean billionaire, stood across from her on their wedding day, calm, elegant, untouchable. No one knew the truth. Not the board, not the lawyers, not even his family, only him, and the clock inside his chest that was quietly running out. It's a new year, and while others scroll past stories like this, you stayed. That means you care, you feel, you don't want to miss moments that remind us we're alive. So subscribe, join this family, and tell me where you're watching from. Your presence matters more than you think today. Maggie Thompson had learned early that love was a currency she couldn't afford to spend. She stood before the floor-length mirror in the bridal suite of the Peninsula Seoul, adjusting the modest neckline of her ivory gown. The dress was elegant, expensive, and chosen by someone else entirely. She didn't mind. This wasn't about her preferences. This was about survival, dressed in silk. "You look beautiful," her reflection seemed to mock. Beautiful was irrelevant. Practical was everything. At 31, Maggie had built her life on the foundation of absolute self-reliance. Growing up in Detroit's East Side, she'd watched her mother love 3 different men into financial ruin. Each time her mother had believed. Each time the fairy tale had crumbled into eviction notices and empty refrigerators. By 16, Maggie had sworn an oath to herself. She would never need anyone. She would never be foolish enough to believe. Now she was about to marry a billionaire she'd met exactly 4 times. The irony wasn't lost on her. She touched her natural hair, styled in an elegant updo that had taken the Korean stylist 3 uncertain attempts to perfect. Maggie had been patient. She was always patient. Patience was a form of control, and control was everything. Her phone buzzed, a message from her best friend, Diane. "Tell me you're not actually doing this." Maggie typed back, "Stability isn't romantic, but it's real." She silenced the phone and dropped it into her clutch. 3 floors below, Junho Kang stood in a private room, struggling with his cufflinks. His fingers trembled slightly, a recent development he despised. He steadied his hands through sheer will, the same will that had built Kang Industries into Asia's most innovative technology empire. He was 43 years old, worth approximately $12 billion, and running out of time. The mirror showed him what the world saw: sharp jawline, immaculate posture, the kind of controlled elegance that graced magazine covers. What the mirror couldn't show was the exhaustion that had settled into his bones like permanent frost, or the small orange bottle hidden in his jacket pocket. He swallowed 2 pills dry. The medication tasted bitter, chemical, appropriate somehow. His assistant knocked. "Sir, it's time." Junho straightened his tie. "The documents?" "Signed and filed. Everything is in order." Everything was in order. His empire would transition smoothly. His family's legacy would remain intact. And Maggie Thompson, intelligent, practical, emotionally unavailable Maggie Thompson, would receive enough money to transform her life without ever having to love him. It was, he told himself, the most honest arrangement he could offer. He had found her through an unconventional matchmaking service that catered to wealthy individuals seeking contractual marriages. Her profile had been refreshingly blunt. "I'm not interested in love, companionship, or children. I want financial security in exchange for social partnership. No games, no pretense." Perfect, he had thought. She wouldn't grieve. The wedding ceremony was a masterpiece of aesthetic precision. 300 guests filled the grand ballroom, politicians, executives, celebrities, all performing their designated roles in this theater of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across imported marble floors. White roses climbed every pillar, their sweetness almost suffocating. Maggie walked down the aisle alone. She had no father to give her away, and she wouldn't have wanted one anyway. She belonged to herself. Junhoo watched her approach with an expression that others might have mistaken for cold indifference. But something flickered in his eyes, something almost like guilt. She noticed his hands trembling as he took hers at the altar. "You're shaking," she whispered. "Nerves." His voice was steady, contradicting his body. Maggie didn't believe him, but she didn't press. They had agreed. No probing into each other's private lives. Whatever secrets he kept were his own. The officiant spoke words about love, commitment, eternity. Maggie listened with detached amusement. Junhoo listened with something heavier. 3 months, he thought. Perhaps 4 if the treatment responds. "I do," Maggie said when prompted, her voice clear and unbothered. "I do," Junhoo echoed. The kiss was brief, functional, witnessed by hundreds. His lips were cold. The reception blurred into champagne toasts and performative congratulations. Maggie smiled appropriately, answered questions about their private courtship with rehearsed vagueness, and counted the hours until she could retreat to her separate bedroom in his Hanam-dong mansion. She caught Junhoo excusing himself twice, once for nearly 20 minutes. When he returned, his complexion seemed grayer, though he moved with the same controlled precision. By midnight, the last guests had departed. The massive house fell silent. Maggie found her designated suite and closed the door with relief. The contract was signed. The performance was complete. Tomorrow, she would begin her new life of comfortable independence within an empty marriage. Exactly as planned. Junhoo didn't go to his bedroom. Instead, he walked to his private study, locked the door, and opened the drawer he'd sealed before leaving for the ceremony. The envelope inside was marked with the logo of Seoul National University Hospital. He already knew what it said. He'd known for 6 weeks now. But somehow, holding the paper made it real in a way that the doctor's careful words hadn't. Progressive, aggressive, inoperable. The prognosis stared back at him in clinical black letters, a death sentence dressed in medical terminology. He touched his wedding ring, cold platinum against cold skin. Outside his window, Seoul glittered with 10 million lives continuing obliviously forward. Inside this room, Junhoo Kang sat alone with the terrible mathematics of his remaining days. The woman upstairs thought she'd signed a contract for stability. She had no idea she'd signed a contract for grief. He folded the results carefully, precisely, and whispered to the darkness the words he could never speak aloud. "Forgive me." 3 weeks into marriage, Maggie discovered she was drowning in kindness. It arrived in small waves at first. Fresh flowers in her suite every morning, always her favorites, though she couldn't remember mentioning them. A private driver available at any hour. An unlimited credit card she hadn't requested. A personal chef who somehow knew she preferred her eggs scrambled soft with hot sauce on the side. Then the waves grew larger. A first-edition collection of Toni Morrison's novels appeared in her sitting room. A state-of-the-art home gym was installed because she'd mentioned once, that she missed her boxing classes. Her student loan debt, the quiet burden she'd carried for 11 years, vanished overnight without discussion. Maggie sat in her private suite, surrounded by luxury she hadn't earned and felt something she couldn't name. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't comfort. It was unease. Junhoo maintained perfect distance. They shared breakfast each morning in the glass-walled dining room overlooking the city. He asked about her plans, her comfort, her needs. He listened with genuine attention. He never touched her beyond the occasional brush of fingers when passing the salt. He never asked for anything in return. "You don't have to keep buying me things," Maggie said one morning, pushing away a jewelry box that had appeared beside her plate. "It brings me pleasure." His smile was warm but somehow sad. "Please, allow me this." She studied his face. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, expertly concealed but visible to anyone paying attention. His suits hung slightly looser than they had at the wedding. He ate like a man, forcing himself through an unpleasant task. "Are you sleeping?" she asked. "Enough." "Are you eating properly?" "Enough." The word felt like a wall. She stopped asking. By the 5th week, patterns emerged that Maggie couldn't ignore. Junho treated every moment like it was borrowed. He lingered at breakfast, watching her read the news, as if memorizing ordinary things. He came home early from work, unusual for a CEO, just to ask about her day. He photographed her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, his phone capturing candid moments she didn't understand the value of. He never argued about anything. When she criticized the interior designer's choices, he had the rooms redone. When she mentioned the mansion felt isolated, he bought a penthouse in Gangnam and gave her the choice. When she expressed discomfort with the household staff's formality, he reduced their presence. Every preference she voiced became immediate reality. It should have felt like power. Instead, it felt like apology. "Why do you do this?" she demanded one evening. Junho looked up from his reading. "Do what?" "This." She gestured vaguely at the beautiful prison surrounding her. "The gifts, the compliance, the way you look at me like—" She stopped, unable to articulate the strange guilt she saw in his eyes. "Like what?" His voice was gentle. "Like you're already mourning me," she thought. But that made no sense. "Never mind." He returned to his book, but his hands were trembling again. He hid them beneath the pages. She began watching him more carefully, the pills he took when he thought she wasn't looking, not vitamins, despite what the bottle claimed. The phone calls he always took in private, emerging pale and quiet. The locked drawer in his study that he thought she didn't know about. He avoided intimacy completely, not just physical, emotional. Whenever conversation drifted toward future plans, he redirected. Whenever she mentioned next year, next season, next month, something flickered across his face. Fear, maybe, or resignation. "We should discuss the holidays," she said once. "Your family will expect—" "Let's focus on the present." His interruption was soft but absolute. "The future will sort itself." The future will sort itself. What kind of billionaire didn't plan ahead? The answer came on a Tuesday night, delivered through a door she should have knocked on. Maggie had woken thirsty, wandering the darkened mansion toward the kitchen. Passing Junho's study, she heard his voice. Low, controlled, unmistakably pained. She paused. Listened. "Understand the progression. I'm not asking for miracles." A long silence. He was on the phone, speaking to someone whose responses she couldn't hear. "No, she doesn't know. She can't know." Maggie's breath stopped. 3 months is enough." His voice cracked on the word. "It has to be enough. I need to make sure she's taken care of. After." After. After what? "The provisions are complete. The lawyers have everything. She'll never want for anything when I'm—" He stopped, started again. "When this is over." The silence stretched eternal. "I know what I'm doing. I've made peace with it. Just promise me the transition will be seamless. Promise me she won't suffer because of my choices." Maggie's legs gave out. She slid down the wall, hand pressed against her mouth to contain the scream building in her chest. 3 months. 3 months is enough. She confronted him at dawn. Junho found her in the living room, still wearing yesterday's clothes, eyes red from crying. The medical results she'd found in his unlocked study, finally unlocked, finally careless, were spread across the coffee table. He stopped in the doorway. His face went white. "Maggie, when were you going to tell me?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "When you started dying. When you were already dead?" He closed his eyes. "I wasn't." The confession hung between them like a blade. "You married me knowing you were terminal." She choked on the words. "You made me complicit in whatever this is. I never wanted to trap you." He stepped closer, then stopped, respecting distance she hadn't asked for. The contract is designed to free you. After, everything transfers. You'll be protected forever. I didn't ask for protection. I asked for honesty. Honesty would have been cruelty. His voice broke. You wanted stability, not grief. I was trying to give you what you needed. You don't get to decide what I need. He had no answer. He simply stood there, dying slowly, loving too carefully, wrong about everything that mattered. That night, Maggie packed a single bag. She took nothing he'd given her, no jewelry, no clothes, no credit cards, just the belongings she'd arrived with, the woman she'd been before this beautiful catastrophe. The mansion was silent as she descended the stairs. 3 in the morning. The staff was sleeping. June-Hoo was hopefully sleeping too, though she doubted either of them would sleep peacefully again. At the door, she paused, turned back, the house stretched behind her, full of unanswered questions and a dying man who thought sacrifice was the same as love. She opened the door and stepped into the cold Korean night. Behind her, in the shadows of the staircase, June-Hoo watched her go. He didn't stop her. He never would. Maggie ran until Seoul became a blur of neon and rain. She found herself in a cheap hotel near Itaewon, the kind that asked no questions and accepted cash. The room smelled of cigarettes and loneliness. The sheets were thin, the walls were thinner. She sat on the edge of the bed and sobbed until her ribs ached. Not because she hated him. That would have been simpler. Hatred was clean, manageable, familiar. No. She wept because somewhere between the excessive gifts and trembling hands, between the careful distances and guilty glances, she had started to care. And caring meant losing. Caring meant watching someone fade. Caring meant becoming her mother, loving something destined to leave. She had sworn an oath at 16. She was breaking it now, alone in a room that cost $40 a night. He found her 3 days later, not with lawyers, not with security, not with threats or demands or contractual obligations. June-Hoo Kang stood in her doorway looking like a man who hadn't slept since she'd left. His suit was wrinkled. She'd never seen him wrinkled before. His eyes were hollow. His hands hung empty at his sides. How did you find me? Her voice was hoarse. I own a technology company. A ghost of his usual wit. Finding people is unfortunately simple. She should have slammed the door. She should have screamed, thrown things, demanded he leave her alone with her uncomplicated grief. Instead, she stepped aside and let him in. He sat on the room's single chair while she perched on the bed, maintaining distance neither of them wanted. I didn't come to bring you back, he said quietly. I came to apologize properly. You already apologized. No, I explained. Explanation isn't apology. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, head bowed. I made decisions about your life without consulting you. I treated you like someone who needed protection rather than partnership. I was arrogant enough to believe I knew what was best for you. Maggie said nothing. I convinced myself I was being noble, sacrificial, generous. His laugh was bitter. I was being a coward. Telling you meant facing your reaction. It meant risking that you'd stay out of pity, or worse, that you'd leave and I'd die alone knowing I'd hurt you. So you chose to hurt me anyway, just later. Yes. He looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. And I'll regret it for whatever time I have left. The honesty cracked something inside her. What do you want, June-Hoo? Really? I want you happy. His voice broke on the word. That's all. Whether you return or not, whether you forgive me or not, whether you remember me with fondness or fury, I just want your life to be good. That's why I structured the contract the way I did. That's why I never asked for more. I wanted to give you everything and take nothing. You took my choice. I know. You took my ability to prepare. I know. You took... She stopped, choking. You took the chance for me to love you properly. His breath caught. Maggie! I'm not saying I do. I'm saying I might have. I'm saying you didn't even let me try. She didn't return to the mansion. Not yet. Instead, she made a different demand. Show me who you really are. They flew to Detroit first, her territory. Anonymous streets where billions meant nothing, and Jun-Hoo was just a tired Korean man holding her hand through the neighborhood that raised her. She showed him the apartment where she'd learned to survive, the corner store where she'd stolen bread during the hungry years, the cemetery where her grandmother rested. He listened to everything, judged nothing. Singapore came next, a neutral space where neither of them held history. They walked through gardens by the bay at midnight, surrounded by impossible trees glowing purple and blue. For 3 days, they simply existed together. No contracts, no expectations, no countdown. In Shanghai, Jun-Hoo shared his memories, the pressure of being the only son, the father who measured love in achievements, the mother he'd lost at 12, whose death had taught him that loving people meant preparing to lose them. So you decided to lose first, Maggie said, before anyone could leave you. Yes, he smiled sadly. We're more alike than you realize. She couldn't argue. Australia broke them open completely. Sydney Harbor at sunset, wine neither of them finished, a conversation that lasted until dawn. He told her about the diagnosis, the headaches that started as annoyances and ended as death sentences. She told him about the oath she'd sworn, the walls she'd built, the terror of becoming soft. Somewhere over the Pacific, flying toward another destination neither of them cared about, Maggie realized she was in love with a dying man. And she wasn't running anymore. Time became different after that. Every sunrise mattered. Every ordinary breakfast felt sacred. Every brush of fingers carried weight that luxury never could. Maggie learned to read his fatigue levels, his medication schedules, his good days and bad days. She learned that he made terrible jokes when he was hurting and grew quiet when he was scared. She learned that he had never, not once, planned to use her. He had only planned to free her, and she learned that freedom meant nothing without someone to share it with. The decision formed slowly, then arrived all at once. The contract said no children, she said one evening in their Tokyo hotel room. Jun-Hoo stiffened. I would never hold you to terms made under false pretenses. You're free from all of it. I know. She turned to face him fully. I'm not asking to be released from the clause. I'm asking to change it. His confusion was genuine. Change it how? I want to give you something you never asked for. She took his trembling hands in hers. An heir, a future, a piece of you that continues after... She couldn't finish. Maggie! His voice was strangled. I can't ask you to raise a child alone. I can't burden you with... You're not asking. I'm offering. Tears streamed down her face. Let me love you properly. Let me choose this. Let me give you forever, even if you can't stay for it. He kissed her then. Really kissed her. For the first time since their cold, contractual wedding, he kissed her like a man who desperately wanted to live. 6 weeks later, in the bathroom of their Malibu rental, Maggie held a small plastic stick with shaking hands. She had taken 3 tests, then 5, then 7, all identical, all positive. She pressed her hand against her still flat stomach, imagining the microscopic cluster of cells that represented impossible hope. Behind her, the door opened. Jun-Hoo appeared in the mirror's reflection, questions in his exhausted eyes. Maggie turned, held up the test, and watched his face transform. Hope, terror, joy, grief, everything all at once, crashing together. We're having a baby, she whispered. And for the first time since his diagnosis, Jun-Hoo Kang wept. Jun-Hoo became a different man in those final months. The reserved billionaire who had hidden behind careful distances transformed into someone Maggie barely recognized. He laughed more. He touched her constantly, her hands, her shoulders, her growing belly. He photographed everything obsessively, creating albums he would never see completed. "I've chosen a name," he announced one morning, kneeling before her in their bedroom. Maggie ran her fingers through his thinning hair. The treatments had stolen its thickness, but she loved him more fiercely now than when he'd been perfect. "Tell me." "Junhee." He pressed his lips against her stomach. "It means talented and graceful. Everything I hope our child becomes. And if it's a boy, still Junhee. The name works for both." He smiled up at her. "I want them connected to me, even when—" He stopped. They never finished those sentences anymore. "Junhee," Maggie repeated, tasting the syllables. "It's beautiful." He talked to her belly every night. Long conversations in Korean that Maggie only partially understood. Stories about his childhood, his mother, his dreams. Promises he might not keep. Apologies for absences he couldn't prevent. "Your mother is the bravest person I've ever known," he whispered one evening, thinking Maggie was asleep. "She chose to love someone who was already leaving. That takes more courage than building empires." Maggie kept her eyes closed, tears sliding silently into her pillow. "I need you to take care of her. When I can't, I need you to remind her that she's extraordinary, that she deserves every happiness, that loving me wasn't a mistake, even though it hurt." His voice cracked. "And please, please remember that I wanted to stay. I fought to stay. Every minute I'm given is a minute I spend grateful for you." He kissed her belly once more, then climbed carefully into bed beside her. Maggie rolled toward him and held on until morning. The decline came faster than the doctors predicted. Junhee hid it masterfully. He smiled through headaches that left him colorblind. He laughed through nausea that emptied him. He held her through nights when his bones ached so badly he couldn't sleep. "You're getting worse," Maggie said, watching him struggle with a coffee cup. "I'm getting better at hiding it." His joke fell flat. "Let me pretend a little longer, please." She wanted to argue. She wanted to demand honesty, hospitals, miracles. Instead, she sat beside him and pretended too. He died on a Thursday. The morning had been unremarkable. Breakfast together, his hand on her belly, the baby kicking against his palm. He'd laughed, really laughed, and said the baby was already impatient, just like its mother. By afternoon, he was struggling to breathe. By evening, he was gone. It happened quietly. No dramatic speeches, no final confessions, just Maggie holding his hand in their bedroom, the monitors showing numbers that meant nothing and everything. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you. Stay. Please stay." His eyes fluttered open one last time. "Thank you," he breathed, "for choosing me." Then he was still. Maggie screamed until the nurses came. She screamed until her throat bled. She screamed for the man who had loved too carefully, died too young, and left her carrying his only legacy. Outside their window, Seoul glittered indifferently. Inside, Maggie's world collapsed into silence. The funeral was a spectacle of grief. Thousands attended. Politicians spoke of his brilliance. Executives praised his vision. Journalists documented every tear, every flower, every moment of public mourning. Maggie stood apart from it all. She wore black silk over her swollen belly, her hand pressed protectively against the child who would never know its father. She accepted condolences from strangers who couldn't pronounce her name correctly. She smiled for cameras that cared more about scandal than sorrow. The private burial was smaller. Just her, his remaining family, and a priest who spoke words Maggie couldn't absorb. They lowered him into the ground, and she felt something inside her die too. Not hope. She couldn't afford to lose hope. She was carrying his child, but innocence maybe. The belief that love could exist without devastation. She left the cemetery alone, one hand on her belly, the other clutching the wedding ring he'd slipped off his finger in those final hours. "Keep it," he'd whispered. "For June, She would. Forever. The appointment was routine. 22 weeks. Standard ultrasound. Maggie lay on the examination table, staring at the ceiling, feeling nothing. Grief had made her numb. She ate because the baby needed food. She slept because the baby needed rest. She survived because surrender wasn't an option anymore. The technician moved the wand across her gel-covered stomach, studying the screen with professional focus. Then she paused, frowned, adjusted something. "Mrs. Kang," she said slowly, "I need to get the doctor." Maggie's heart stopped. "What's wrong? Is the baby?" "Nothing's wrong. Please wait." The minutes stretched eternal. Maggie gripped the table's edges, preparing for another loss. She couldn't survive another loss. She would shatter completely, finally, irreparably. The doctor entered, calm and smiling. "Mrs. Kang, I have unexpected news." She pointed at the screen, tracing two distinct shapes Maggie's untrained eyes had missed. "There are 2 heartbeats." The words didn't register. 2 heartbeats? "Twins. You're carrying twins." Maggie stared at the screen. 2 heads, 2 spines, 2 tiny hearts beating in perfect rhythm. His legacy had doubled. She broke completely then. Sobs racked her body, grief and joy tangled together so thoroughly she couldn't separate them. The doctor held her hand and let her cry. Junho would never see his children, but his children would carry him forward, together forever. 6 months later, Maggie held her newborns for the first time. A boy and a girl. Identical dark eyes, identical tiny fists, identical expressions of bewildered newness. The delivery had been difficult. 37 hours of labor, complications that required intervention, moments when Maggie had begged for mercy. But she'd survived. They'd survived. Junho Kang, she named the boy, his father's name carried forward. Junhee Kang for the girl, the name he'd chosen, graceful and talented. She cradled them both against her chest, feeling their heartbeats synchronize with her own. "Your father loved me enough to let me go," she whispered into their soft, perfect skin. "And I loved him enough to stay." Outside the hospital window, souls sparkled with 10 million lives continuing forward. Inside this room, 3 hearts beat where one had stopped. Maggie pressed kisses against each tiny forehead and made her own silent promises. She would tell them everything, the contract, the illness, the lies that became love. She would show them his photographs, play them his recordings, teach them the Korean phrases he'd whispered to her belly. She would give them a father made of stories and memories, and she would love them enough for 2 parents, forever. For Junho, who loved too carefully, and for Maggie, who learned that control was never the same as safety. Some marriages begin with signatures. The best ones end with heartbeats. Thank you for staying till the end. Most people click away, but you didn't, and that means something. Don't disappear now, subscribe. Stay close this year, and keep walking with us through these stories. Comment, share, and tell me where you're watching from. Your voice matters more than you know today.